Morning, we're going to be in Luke chapter 22. We've got Easter approaching, and we're going to kind of go into the Garden of Gethsemane this morning. We're going to look at what took place with Jesus as he is praying on the Mount of Olives, and he is preparing himself for the cross. Luke chapter 22, we're going to start here at verse 39. As we read down through this, I want you to think about the battle that was taking place in the mind of Jesus. Understanding that Jesus knew what was going to happen to him, and he begins to accept and take on the responsibility of dying for us. Luke 22, verse 39. And he came out and he went as he went to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples also followed him. And he was at the place, he said unto them, Pray that ye enter not into temptation. And he was withdrawn from them about a stone's cast, and kneeled down and prayed, saying, Father, if thou be willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. And there appeared an angel unto him from heaven, strengthening him. And being in an agony, he prayed more earnestly. And his sweat was, as it were, great drops of blood falling down to the ground. And when he rose up from prayer and was come to his disciples, he found them sleeping for sorrow. And said unto them, Why sleep ye? Rise and pray, lest ye enter into temptation. Jesus here was doing battle, a battle of the mind. And he was thinking about and praying about what was getting ready to happen, the crucifixion. And he was, in his mind, willing himself to endure what was coming. And I want to just stop and think about that, because our battle, oftentimes with sin or Satan, is something that takes place in our mind. When we achieve victory in our mind, we can achieve victory in life. I want to just give you some examples of what I'm talking about. When we endure things, or when we endure temptations, and I believe Jesus here was tempted to just not go through this. I believe this was something that he thought to himself, I can just skip all this and not endure it. That was the temptation. We endure temptations in our life, daily temptations, whatever it is. Sometimes the temptation is food. Our diet. We were on the diet. We're tempted to eat that donut or whatever I've been talking about. I've been on this because I'm preaching to myself here. So sometimes our temptation is an extramarital affair. Sometimes the temptation is something that is standing in our way of a goal that we are trying to achieve, whether it's going back to school or maybe it's just to get out of debt. Whatever it is, there is temptation. And the reason we oftentimes act on temptation or we don't act on temptation is won or lost in our mind. When we think about the consequences for temptation, we are doing battle with that temptation. Okay, and so it's important that we dwell on and think about consequences. We set up boundaries or fences. And so it's like we have these scenarios that we play in our mind, and we would say to ourselves, well, if I go to Walmart, I know where the donuts are. So I'm going to say, I'm gonna try to stay away from that area or not look at it. All right? And so it's the same way whenever if you have a spending problem, we don't go to the store and look around. Don't pick up that catalog and flip through. Because we're putting ourselves in temptation. And if we can avoid the temptation, well, we are successful. My mom and I, we had a conversation. We were talking about teen pregnancy. And it's something that it seems to, it's always been around. It's not a new thing, but it seems like that it's something that is a problem. And I have talked to young people and tried to get them to understand the problems involved with having a baby and there not being a marriage or a home to bring the child home to. But there is a problem when you're a teenager. I've been there. I understand that there's this thing called hormones. That's what makes the deer go crazy in the fall. It makes the little young bucks act real stupid and they get shot. And so what needs to happen is you need to have fences set up that protect you from doing things that you know you shouldn't be doing. And those fences are made of consequences. It's, if I do this action, it will have this consequence. And that is a clear boundary that keeps me from stepping over the line. If I eat another box of donuts, I'm not going to be able to fit into my pants. If I don't lose some weight, I'm just going to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I have found, growing up on a dairy farm there, we always had, you had bulls and you had heifers. And you don't separate your bull and your heifer with one little bitty hot wire. Not if you want to keep them apart very long. Especially if your fence charger only works about half the time. It's not a good recipe. You might want to put on the inside of a big barbed wire fence or a big woven fence. You have to make some serious boundaries when you have a 2,000-pound animal that wants to get through on the other side of the fence. And that's the same type of things. Oftentimes we have these battles in our mind. Now Jesus here was setting up some things in his mind, and he was wrestling with them in his mind, and he was enduring such an agony that an angel came down, strengthened him, and that he sweat great drops of blood. Now, if we were to take time with the thing that we struggle with, and we were to wrestle with that, and take seriously the consequences of our actions, as Jesus here has shown us through His example, we would probably have a lot less teen pregnancy. We would probably have a lot less marriages that end up in divorce. And we would probably all fit back into our jeans that we used to wear when we were in high school. It's that battle. It's setting up the mental fences. It's willing something in our mind before we get to the store and buying that thing that we don't really need. Or talking to the girl at the office that we probably should stay away from. Doing things on our dates that, well, if Mom and Dad were in the car, we probably wouldn't be doing. Battles. The battle is lost or won in your mind before the battle even starts. I want to go a little step farther, because when you actually lose the battle in your mind, the sin has already been committed. I'm going to talk a little bit about that, because Jesus was trying to get you to understand that whether or not you actually did a physical thing, if you allowed your mind to go ahead and say that that is okay, that your heart has already committed the sin. Matthew chapter 5, verse 28. This is a sermon, that one of Jesus' first sermons here, and he is trying to get his disciples and a group of people who are there to understand that Jesus, that God looks at the heart, and He judges us according not always to our actions, but according to our thoughts, our desires, our wants. What we have said in our mind is okay. Matthew chapter 5, verse 28. Says, "But I say unto you that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart." Now, this is part of the boundaries that we set up. In a marriage, we have boundaries. Okay, when I made my commitment to Kim on our wedding day, and I said, well, I am forsaking all others. That means that any other women that happen to come into my life, are off limits. Not only physically are they off limits, but mentally. Jesus says, mentally, they are off limits. And the reason why is because once I say in my mind that they are not, well, the next step is adultery. Is doing something that I shouldn't be doing. This is our problem. Our problem in America is that we just say, well, anything goes. Or, this is one of my favorites, you can look but don't touch. It's not what the Bible says. We need to have clearly drawn boundaries in our mind as to what is acceptable and what is unacceptable. Because when temptation comes, if that boundary is not there, it's real easy to just step out of line. We have to think about the consequences. It's sad but true that when marriages end in divorce, and I see these kids that, they go to school with my kids, and my kids will come home and say, well, so-and-so's getting a divorce. And oftentimes, the kids are the ones that are hurt. And I can say that because I came from a broken home. My parents got divorced. It was nothing that I could have done. It's nothing that I did. But yet I felt the consequences of sin. I know what it's like. Oftentimes, children pay the consequences from the parents' action. It's sad, but it's true. And it's that fact, it's the fact that I know, hey, this is going to affect my kids, and that's why we strive so hard to try to put and pour time into our marriage. Kim and I had our anniversary getaway this weekend. It's something that we try to do every year for our anniversary. This year is going to be 19 years for us. And so we left the kids with the aunt and uncle's house, and we went and we spent time together. It's just a time when we say, this is a special thing. And we set up apart a time for that. We make it a priority. Because we know what happens when we don't. We have drawn a conclusion that when things are bad at home, things get bad everywhere. We have drawn boundaries. It's difficult to stay in that boundary, but it's important that we understand that boundary is that thought. That thought that we let grow, that we let go to seed, that gets out of control, that we dwell on over and over and over again. If you don't stamp it out, it can be the cancer that destroys your marriage. That destroys your relationship with God. That sabotages that goal. The battle is lost or won in your mind. So this morning, as we have a song of invitation, I'm going to ask you to think about the thoughts that you have, things that you dwell on, and ask yourself, are those things contrary to the teaching of God, to the covenant that you have made, to the goals that you're trying to achieve? And if they are, we need to build some fences around them and keep them out as we sing this morning.
Page 138.